Allow me to welcome everyone officially to today's UK Impact Investing Institute conversation, The Power of Now, Investing for Gender and Climate. My name is Laurie Spengler, and I'm delighted to serve as a non-executive board member of the UK Impact Investing Institute, where I lead our international development work. And I'm super excited about today's conversation. It's come out of a couple of different factors and drivers. One is that at the end of last year, we held our first conversation around gender lens investing. And it was both very well attended, but also the attendees really had a desire to go deeper on different opportunities for gender lens investing. A second driver was the recently concluded Gender Smart Investing Summit, where the topic of climate and gender really became a focal point in the conversation around the summit. And the third is our own work at the Institute, where we're actually seeing the relationship between environmental considerations and social factors of top relevance for asset allocators, for policymakers, for communities. And so those combination of factors really motivated us to have this conversation today. And we're very fortunate to have four extraordinary practitioners to really lead the conversation. Suzanne Beagle, founder of Gender Smart and CEO of Catalyst at Large. And Suzanne really is a driver in the field of gender lens investing, and specifically now in gender and climate. Tim Raji, the founder and managing director of Alpha Mundi Group in Geneva, with a strong focus on private markets and the activities there, a real veteran of how we use private capital for positive impact, and with a deep experience in gender and climate. Julie Gordy, SVP for Sustainable Investing at Impax Asset Management, really will give us the perspective of public markets and some of the trends and activities that's going on there. And Courtney Thompson, Executive Director for Global Sustainable Finance at Morgan Stanley. And Courtney will also share with us the perspective from their clients. What are they seeing in terms of demand for products and solutions that reflect gender and climate? The format for today will be that I'll first have a conversation with Suzanne, kind of set the table for the conversation, set our framework, and then Suzanne will have the conversation with Tim, Julie, and Courtney. We'll have the first 30 minutes together, and then we'll invite Q&A from all of you. We would ask you to use the Q&A window to post your questions, and don't hesitate. You can be doing that at any time during the conversation. And then we'll come together for a brief close. There's a lot to cover in an hour. I know it will fly by, but this is an area that the Institute is doing more and more work in, and this will not be our last conversation on this topic. I should say that today is being recorded, and we will be sharing that recording through the Institute's website in the coming weeks, as well as a follow-up note that you will all receive having registered for the session today. So with that, before I turn to Suzanne, let's just see what the poll revealed. Sophia, can you put up those results? Oh, that's fantastic. So what that tells us is that the bulk of people joining us today are looking at allocating capital through both a gender and climate lens. So that's terrific. And I think really focuses then, Suzanne, the conversation and the opportunity to go deeper in. So let me invite Suzanne to join me, and turn your video on, Suzanne. Hi there, terrific. I should say Suzanne is also a dear friend, ally, co-conspirator in all of this work, and it's been a privilege to work alongside you, Suzanne, for a number of years. And so I wanted to kick off by asking you just to orient us. You know, we use the frame of lenses, we talk about climate and gender. What can you share with us, what do we really mean by that, by combining these two lenses, just as a first comment?
Thank you, Laurie, and I want to thank you and the Impact Investing Institute for inviting me here, and all of us, giving us this chance to be together. So what does it mean to bring these two together? We've been working as part of a working group on climate and gender finance over the past year, and realizing that we have these two silos. People are understanding climate finance and they're understanding gender finance, but bringing them together is about not only what we're investing in, but how, who is doing the investing, what's the investment process that we're using. And we're talking about the fact that you can use an intentional lens to say, where are the women entrepreneurs and innovators and climate scientists and those that are really creating climate smart solutions or leading companies or funds that are climate smart. You can be thinking about the products and services. You can be thinking about employment but really saying I want to start with a very specific gender agenda or gender and climate agenda, or you can be using an integrated lens and saying in any climate investment, where would I be looking at gender factors around governance, leadership, management, employment, supply chains, products and services and customers, looking through the whole value chain of a business or an initiative to really get smarter about your climate impact as well as your gender and development impact.
I think that's fantastic, Suzanne. It's very helpful, those two perspectives of intentional and integrated, because really you're really arguing no matter where you're starting from, you actually can find both of these lenses at work, and it can also expand the way you may be looking at the opportunity, analyzing the opportunity. And I also really like your emphasis on the who. Who are we investing in? Not only what we're investing in. So I think I really like that notion of be intentional, what's driving the investment strategy in the pursuit, but also that integrated approach, a more holistic opportunity to see where gender and climate may be present together.
Yeah, and people can be coming at this from a defensive position and saying, where are the risks in not paying attention to gender? And we are getting comfortable with the idea of where are the risks in not paying attention to climate impacts. But now it's really bringing in and saying, if you're doing climate investing, what are you missing when you are not looking at governance, when you're not thinking about talent, when you're not thinking about our products and services fit for purpose for men and women, and really recognizing that as a prudent investor, thinking about what our responsibility as investors is, I need to be thinking about these factors. Or you can be coming from an offensive position and saying, where are the opportunities here? And by the way, what am I missing? Again, by not paying attention to gender in terms of new markets, again, access to talent, access to resilient supply chains, and really thinking about this in a whole set of different contexts. So it's really, you can be coming at it from either the defensive or the offensive position.
I think that's also really powerful, Suzanne. And I'm reminded when we had the privilege of interviewing Hiro Mizono at the Gender Smart Summit, who's the former chief investment officer of Japan's largest pension fund. And he talked about that risk, that defensive posture and the risk, and really made the argument that from a societal point of view, you cannot be blind to the forces around you in which the portfolio is sitting. And these blind spots are real. And what you're really arguing, I think, is that by combining gender and climate, you actually tackle more of those blind spots in a more powerful way. And I think that risk approach is something that really, I think when you get into conversation with our colleagues, some of the examples will play out. I think that's very powerful. So yeah. Suzanne, why now? Why is this an important topic? We've been seeing momentum, and gender lens investing has been gaining momentum. Climate finance has been gaining momentum. Why is now a good moment to be trying to forge more combination with these two lenses?
Well, I think in the context of, we named our summit, our recent summit, Crisis as Catalyst. And so if you think about the climate crisis, the COVID crisis, the gender and racial equity crisis, the COVID crisis especially really uncovered inequities that have been there all along, but really came to light. And whether that is about thinking about the lack of a functioning care economy, whether that is thinking about the she-cession, where are the jobs and how are jobs being lost and gained? If we're really thinking about the need for resilient local supply chains and for digital access, people have really woken up about these different issues. And so why now? It's on people's minds. And it's also on the foreign policy agendas of many governments. So that you're really asking, the Canadian government, the British government, what are the top foreign policy areas that you need to be thinking about? It's climate, gender, diversity, sustainable, resilient jobs and economies. So this is a moment where, as we think about rebuilding and building back better or building back new, this is the moment to be thinking about this. Obviously, we're also in a COP26 moment of saying, what is going to make this work? How are we going to galvanize global solutions and global attention in a way that is going to be not only about this event in November, but enduring? And we know that women are the key to unlocking climate solutions. And it's coming out in governance. There's increasing, Julie, I think, might share a report from Impacts and PACS, Sasakawa Peace Foundation, and Bloomberg New Energy Finance did a recent report about when you have more women in governance on the investment funds, on the business level, you get better climate outcomes and business outcomes. And just gender diversity. People are really recognizing that gender diversity matters, and we need this right now.
Fantastic. You're making the power of now, the moment of now. So last question, Suzanne, before you invite colleagues, is just give us a quick sense of the trends you're seeing across the asset classes, because importantly, we are seeing this everywhere. This is not unique to one asset class or one geography or one specific sector. So I know you can't go into, you're going to get into more examples with our colleagues, but just give us a quick overview of the top trends you're seeing across asset classes.
Okay, so first of all, just to level set, we're looking at innovation across every area. We're talking about energy and agriculture, infrastructure, sustainable cities, sustainable circular economy, fashion. It's everywhere. But when you get down to the asset class level in public markets, Julie's going to share about this because she's running a public markets fund. It's the integration of the S and the G in ESG. It's really getting smarter about looking at the gender data in companies as it is looking at the climate data, but it's also thinking about what's our role in shareholder engagement. So where are shareholders really getting active? And then where's the public policy piece of that? On the private market side, VC, PE, private debt, we're seeing increasingly climate smart fund managers calling and asking about how do I get gender smart? And I had the privilege of working with Responsibility, a top quartile fund manager, with one of their funds that is a climate debt fund, to say, how do we really now integrate gender into this picture? And they have a number of DFIs who are backing that fund, and the 2X criteria and the 2X challenge, 2X collaborative is really influencing private market vehicles. We'll talk more about that. In the bond market, look, we've hit $1 trillion in climate bonds. We've only hit 2.7 billion on gender bonds, and there are new ones coming out. But where will be the first climate and gender bond? And the FCDO, I think, is very interested in seeing, could this be in Asia? Where they have an initiative, which is the ASEAN Low Carbon Energy Program. They're really looking to educate the regulators and the central bankers and the stock exchanges and corporates and bankers to say what's possible here. But it's a little opportunity for positive competition. And even in infrastructure. This is really coming out in infrastructure investments. Again, the development finance institutions and public sector financing playing a big role here in being very intentional to say, again, in energy, in transport, in sustainable housing, where can you bring a gender lens in? So this is coming across every asset class. I could give you real estate examples. And I think this part of the goal here is to expand people's aperture about what's possible and where this is happening.
Fantastic. That is great. So if people didn't think it was an opportunity at the beginning of this conversation, hopefully everyone's now poised to say this is an expansive opportunity set. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Suzanne, to dig in a little bit more specifically with our colleagues, Julie, Courtney, and Tim. So thanks so much, Suzanne, and I'll be back during the Q&A.
Thank you, Lori. And I'm going to ask Julie, Tim, and Courtney to put on your videos and your microphones. And again, Lori did a little bit of introducing. Tim and I have the pleasure of working together. He's on the steering committee for the Climate and Gender Investing Working Group that we have with Gender Smart. He is, as you heard, the chair, managing partner of Alpha Mundi. He wears a number of hats, including Sustainable Finance Geneva, and I know you're going to bring in something around that. Julie Gordy is we've known each other for a very long time, a powerhouse in not only the work that you're doing at PACS and Impacts, but really influencing the market from not only portfolio management around ESG and gender specifically and climate, but also the shareholder engagement piece and the public policy piece. So I'm excited to have you here. And then Courtney, Executive Director of Global Sustainable Finance at Morgan Stanley. We've been working together for 2 years now, and she is really supporting the development of sustainable financial products across the firm's institutional securities area, wealth management, investment management. So she brings a really broad perspective from Morgan Stanley. So with that, I'm going to actually do a very quick lightning round with each of you about why do you care about this? And maybe just some little tidbit of something someone wouldn't know about you, just super quickly, that relates to climate and gender or gender. So Tim, will you start us off?
Sure. No, I think for us, it's really based on our experience with a gender balanced team, right, at Alpha Mundi. That's how it started. The fact that we could access more talent, better talent, and just reflect the evidence that's growing in the marketplace, that diverse and gender balanced teams are more resilient in terms of their performance in times of crisis and offer better long-term performance in financial management. And we've also seen that in our portfolio companies for the last 12 years. We focus on impact investing in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa, small and medium enterprises. And some of the most successful stories have really come with gender balanced teams, or even teams that are led by women. I'll be happy to give more examples.
Right. And in agriculture and energy and other areas that we're going to be talking about, right? So
absolutely. Yeah.
Great. And Julie, maybe you can share a little bit about, something we wouldn't know about you, and also what's your why in this?
So my why is that I think the earth is a fantastic place to live, and I want people to keep being able to do that without necessarily making it a not fantastic place to live. So, it's enlightened self-interest. I think investors have tools that we can bring to the game. Tim mentioned several of them. We're going to be talking about more of them. I won't bore you with that. A fact about me that people may not know, but that I'm enormously proud of, is that my daughter is a glaciologist, a climate scientist working on a PhD in climate science, looking at, if you're interested in this, I will happily refer you to her, Antarctic ice mass balance. And she is a fierce advocate for diversity at the University of Colorado. And I flatter myself that the apple fell right under the tree.
Awesome. Well, we're talking about how do we grow the talent base of who's got the solutions that we need and the insights that we need. And so you're doing it. It's fantastic. Courtney, tell us about your why and a little bit about Morgan Stanley's why in this.
Absolutely. I think similar to Tim and Julie, I think we're really seeing this conversation very forcefully from our clients across the spectrum. Climate has long been at the forefront, but gender increasingly. Actually, some of the very first conversations I ever had with clients when I joined Morgan Stanley was focused on this question of gender and how can you make that actionable in your investment portfolios. So I think for my own journey at Morgan Stanley, that's really been from day one. And I enjoy the kind of puzzle of trying to fit different pieces together. I think thinking about how you merge sustainability with finance is one big puzzle. And then when you think thematically around climate and gender much more specifically, I think these are challenging but exciting topics to wrestle with. And I think that's something that motivates me. And on the personal level, I was sharing before, I think ever since childhood, I've been very focused on the gender diversity component. I'm proudly one of 4 sisters. And so watching all of them grow in their professional careers as well is definitely something I've kept in mind across, sustainability, economics, and other fields as well. So definitely excited for the conversation.
Thank you. Okay, so Julie, I want you to start us out here. What are you seeing in public markets around these two themes coming together?
So public markets, when I first started in this business, which was over 2 decades ago, I am, in case you can't tell by the color of my hair, not young. There was a tendency for people on financial markets to sort of think that sustainability issues, gender, climate, et cetera, were for bunny huggers. And if you really want to sacrifice performance, please feel free. But if you're really smart, just let us make you a lot of money and then you can donate it to whoever you want to. We are not going to save the world through philanthropy. It is part of the equation, but it isn't the solution. So when I think in the last 5 years and in general, in the last 2 or 3 in particular, I think the public markets have really crossed the Rubicon, and they're starting to see that sustainability issues really are material. They are things that financial professionals need to pay attention to, need to get up to speed on. And well, about maybe 5 years ago, everybody was looking for a simple plug-in spreadsheet, give me a bunch of ratings that I can plug in and immediately generate alpha kind of solutions. I think people are starting to understand that, anything you can do that way in finance is going to have an impact for about 10 minutes, and then it's going to be arbed away completely. So what people are realizing is that we really need to know things about sustainability, like gender and climate, and find our own paths through the ecosystem of risk opportunity mitigation, adaptation, and diversity, writ large, gender included, in order to invest more sustainably and to help bring about the transition to a more sustainable economy. So I think that's something that public markets now really accept. There's still people that don't. Most of them are old, thank goodness. That, or we could just invent a system to give everybody a frontal lobe transplant that doesn't believe in this already. But you don't have to do that anymore as much, because people are coming through finance curricula and already believing those things. So it's heartening.
So Julie, I'll come back and ask you about, do we have the data to be able to do public markets funds that are smart on both gender and climate? But I'm going to
jump quick. No.
Yeah.
Anyway, we can go on about that later.
Okay. Tim, let's talk about private markets, because that's the world that you live in, and especially in private debt. What are you seeing?
I mean, for us, it's really been an incredible journey, because obviously climate considerations are becoming prevalent across all countries, across all sectors, and across all the financial instruments and asset classes that we manage. And Alpha Mundi, we're lucky to have a good handle on multiple asset classes. We have a foundation that manages grants. We ourselves do private debt, private equity, and mezzanine. So I think the first observation, if you look at our journey of the last dozen years or so, is that increasingly you have to factor in these risks and these considerations, but every risk at the same time is also an opportunity to do better, right? So when we look at our food companies, we have to look at their climate impact. It's massive, of course. Producing food has a massive impact on water and soil and so many other considerations. If we look at our renewable energy companies, the same. They are the solution, the alternative to more classical forms of fuel, to forest destruction. And so it's been very empowering to see that these companies have the ability to grow fast if they have a good management and access to capital, and if regulations cooperate. And from a management perspective, we've been, since 2017 in particular, with our foundation, pushing for a program to embed gender considerations at every level of our portfolio companies. And we've seen very positive results. So I don't know if you want me to give specific examples now or later, but I'll leave it at that.
I'll come back to you. And I think just as people are talking about in the climate space purely, you can have the actors that are already there, but also transition strategy. I think you're alluding to the idea that there's a transition strategy that you can have with private companies as well. If they're gender leaders, then great. But if they're not yet, that you can have a gender path. Courtney, what are you hearing from clients, and what are you seeing at Morgan Stanley?
Absolutely. I think many of the same trends, and as I was alluding to before, I think these conversations have been happening for quite some time. From our separate institute, the Institute for Sustainable Investing that we run at Morgan Stanley, one of the things that we do is we seek to survey the populations of clients and populations that we serve as a company. So obviously, large firm, we work with individuals, families, institutions, as well as corporates and government agencies as well. So really tackling a large swath, but I would say two of those populations, individual investors and then institutional investors and asset owners, we seek to survey them on a biannual basis around sustainability. What are the things that matter to them? And some of the headline stats that we found are that 95% of global asset owners, so institutions, care about climate change or are already implementing that. And that's 78% of individual investors. And then on gender, not far behind, 67% of global asset owners have an interest in gender as an investment theme, and 63% of individual investors. So if you do the math, it's roughly, at a minimum, 40% of that population is interested in both themes. So what does that look like across different asset classes and portfolios is certainly a question, and we can talk more about that. But that is, the headline around, I think, the client demand that we're seeing. And that's certainly translating into our strategy as a firm too. We were the first US bank to commit to net zero financed emissions by 2050. This year, we stood up a new Institute for Inclusion, model after our Institute for Sustainable Investing. I think really reflecting that these are really core themes to our strategy as a firm, both for our own operations and the ways that we serve our clients, which I think is a really key component when you think about how we're going to tackle climate and gender holistically as a financial services sector.
It's great. And I'm going to come back to you for let's get specific about an example. Like, do you have a client who you've done something for that is around that? So Julie, I'm coming back to you. How do we do this? How do we make this happen in a public markets portfolio?
So there are a couple of things that we can do to, you asked about data earlier, Suzanne, and that is the thing that makes markets work. It's modern portfolio theory is absolutely based on information being available about companies. And while financial information has been available for a long time, ESG information really hasn't, or at least E&S. It is getting more prevalent in part because of investor pressure, in part because there are public policies that are helping to push that. For those of you who are in the UK, congratulations on living in a market where they actually require companies to report on gender pay equity. But it's far from universal. It is far from easy for investors to compare peer groups really fairly on any ESG issue or E&S at least. And with respect to gender, I mean, we do this every year. We reconstitute our gender index every year. We find out who's on the board and who's in executive management, among other things, what the benefits are, what the gender pay equity is, all that stuff. And it always involves trying to figure out if somebody named Poontang is a woman or a man. And it shouldn't be that hard. That's the simplest data you can possibly offer people, and not being able to identify board members, executive members, or workforces, by demographic is a pain. The same thing is true with climate. You find companies, a lot of big companies in particular, do have climate reporting. Most of the ones that face transition risk will report something about that transition risk. It is really rare to get physical risk reporting that is useful. We're engaging now actually with the S&P 500 on just reporting physical locations of assets whose loss would be a material event for the company. And so far we've heard back from 65 of them. And of those, we have found 3 that have actually thought deeply and thoroughly about physical risk and how to adapt to it and how to reduce it. So there's a lot more data that we need just in order to do that well. But public policy is helping. I can get to that later.
Okay, so, and I know we don't have a lot of time here, but you're fossil free in your portfolio too, right? So you have a gender fund that is also fossil free.
Correct.
So there's a lot of people that haven't really done that yet because they've said, there's this impression that you're narrowing your opportunity set, or you're narrowing your increasing.
You're narrowing your opportunity set to companies that are more likely to outperform. What's wrong with that? There you go.
Okay, great. So we'll come back to you, Tim. How are you getting this done?
Well, we use a number of instruments. First, at the investment level. Obviously, we're pushing for the gender integration and climate concern integration in the business models and the product and offering design of our portfolio companies. So I'll give 2 quick examples. The first one was a company that we divested in 2018 called Phoenix International. The case study is in the report that was published at the Gender Smart Summit. And it's a fantastic report really that you put together, Suzanne. And basically, this is a company that began in Uganda. It was led by a woman entrepreneur called Lindsay Handler, and it was ultimately acquired by multinational energy giant Engie, right? And today, this company has now spread its wings with the support of this multinational across multiple countries in Africa. At the time of the sale, the company had already reached some 2.5 million clients. And through a gender lens approach to renewable energy solutions, because that company provided solar energy solutions for African clients, what the company was able to do is first take away the gender bias in hiring, right? They didn't realize that they had one, but they had one. They resolved that. Second, they created a mentorship program for women to go from staff to leadership. And they ended up with 40% of their leadership being women and local African talent at that. And third, the entrepreneur pushed for an ownership program for its staff, which it was one of the only companies in Africa in that sector to have that called Phoenix Flames. So it was really, really exciting. And from an investment perspective, the business case, never forget the business case, we earned roughly a 13% IRR over the 6th year of collaboration through multiple instruments. So it was very successful from that perspective as well.
Yeah, so it's a commercial proposition as well as a social and environmental proposition.
Always.
And, and zoom out for a second, and then we're going to go to Courtney. You're collaborating with other funds on this, and you're collaborating across the sustainable finance system in Geneva What is that about?
Very quickly, we have a foundation in Washington, D.C. called Alpha Mundi Foundation that's launched a program called G-Search, and that's in collaboration with Acumen, Small Enterprise Assistance Fund, Root Capital, AHL Ventures, and the Shell Foundation. And what we're doing is we're bringing this experience that we had with Phoenix, we want to see it blossom across all of our portfolio companies. So now we have a grant program that's fueled by Canada and by the US, and we're bringing that experience to more than 30 SMEs, helping them build the toolkit and understand the business case for gender integration with, of course, this climate perspective. And we'll very soon be able to publish that toolkit and that business case in collaboration with the University of Michigan's William Davidson Institute. So that's one tool.
Yeah.
And then the second one, very briefly, is a Gender Lens initiative for Switzerland that we launched at the beginning of this year, again with your support. Thank you very much, Suzanne. And this has elicited the support of leading financial institutions in the Swiss market, and we'll do research, we'll do product innovation, and we'll advocate for better and bigger industry standards for Gender Lens, because we all realize that it doesn't make any sense for us to bet on the future by leaving half of our population or of our talent behind. And the longer we wait, the greater the cost of opportunity for us as financial managers and as stakeholders in the global community.
Thank you. And you talk about toolkits. We are so lucky in some ways in 2021 that we have, compared to when I started investing this way 20 years ago, when people looked at me like I was a crazy woman saying I wanted to be both environmentally and gender aware. CDC, the IFC and CDC and EIB and a whole set of development finance institutions, EBRD, the US Development Finance Corporation coming out with toolkits, a whole set of translators, people who have the expertise to work with companies and work with funds who are emerging, the advisors and the consultants and the capacity builders to help execute this. I think this is a really amazing time that people can be stepping into this. Courtney, turning to you, I asked you to think about a specific example where you're doing this for clients. What does it look like in a specific client situation?
Absolutely. A couple things I'll say on that front. So I think ultimately this comes down and I'm sorry to hear that you thought you felt crazy early on in your career, but I think it's that vocalization from clients about what they want that ultimately moves the needle. And I do think that comes down in many cases in the early days, those who want to pioneer and bring these themes together. The solution set is around customization. So two things I'll say. One, a tool that we've built collaboratively inside of Morgan Stanley with our wealth management platform is a tool called Morgan Stanley IQ. And this is essentially a tool for clients to be able to select the issues that matter most to them. We have over 100 social and environmental issues. Many of those are gender, many of those are climate. And clients can essentially build the profile that reflects their values. And then we can essentially x-ray their public market portfolio, both the intentionality of managers who are, so like Julie's fund obviously would have a dual focus on those two issues intentionally, but also the underlying holdings of any fund to understand which portfolio companies are leading on climate or gender or lagging. And with that tool, we can help clients customize portfolios of strategies that are really meeting their objectives, not just a broad ESG mandate, but really those specific objectives. And so one of the great examples where we brought that to life was a great collaboration we announced last year with a set of Dominican sisters. We helped them actually launch 2 climate solutions funds, one on the public market side and one on the private market side, that really went to fuse their interests both on addressing climate change, but also holistically the SDGs, of course, around poverty, sustainable work, impacts on women disproportionately around the world. This was really their call, inspired by the Pope's Laudato Si, and how they were seeking to achieve that within the context of their investment portfolio. And really at the time when they wanted to do that, there wasn't an off-the-shelf set of strategies that met all of their goals. And so we really helped them build a customized public markets portfolio. And then on the private side, also helping them achieve that across emerging markets in particular as well, thinking about solutions that are driving those climate solutions, but really helping uplift the communities that we all know are disproportionately impacted by climate change, and include those in emerging markets and often women and girls. So I think that's a great example of a way that we can bring data, tools, and customization to our clients.
Yeah, fantastic example. And I just think about the ICCR and series and the influence that the nuns have had in really driving this agenda forward, the sustainability agenda, the ESG agenda, the responsible investment agenda, and now really bringing these together. So we're going to switch gears and we're going to move to questions from the audience. And then I, of course, have so many more questions for all of you. And so I want to encourage people to come in and just keep the questions coming. Lori, is there one that you think we should get started with just to get us going?
I think that picking up from where Courtney just concluded, I think this notion of where women are being disproportionately affected, COVID. So there, I mean, we've seen it across the globe. And so the first question is, what can we do about that? Recognizing, it's not a debate, recognizing it's happening. Are you seeing opportunities in mobilizing investment capital, combining a gender and climate lens that actually can be targeted in some of the areas that are being affected by COVID and the pandemic?
Yeah, well, I want to go to Tim because I know we've been talking about sustainable, resilient supply chains and agriculture and energy, things that have really become, really salient in this moment and the employment picture. Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. So obviously during COVID, we were supportive of our portfolio companies, like most of the investors in the industry, and we agreed to restructure debt. We agreed to inject fresh equity in order to give them more runway to overcome the economic impact of COVID. One of the things we noticed also is that there was a sense of self-sacrifice among the staff of our portfolio companies, where many of them agreed to work on a part-time basis so that everybody could keep a job. And in agriculture and food, we have a strong prevalence of women among the staff of our portfolio companies. And so we saw that we were helping directly and contributing directly to the resilience of women as employees in our portfolio companies through these measures.
Mm-hmm. And really thinking about, as we obviously look at the job losses and then the job creation that's coming back, where are people paying attention to gender sensitive employment practices, right? And things about, again, care economy. And so, Julie, how are you seeing this?
So the She session has been a real thing, and it really has brought into sharp focus the fact that unpaid work is so often allocated to women and expected of women. So we've seen these record losses in terms of gender equality, even in developed markets, as women become not only workers, but caregivers and homeschoolers and still do housework. What we've been doing is engaging with portfolio companies to see what they're doing and to urge them to make sure that all employees are still able to have work-life balance even when they are working from home. Mm-hmm. And when we see a company that is, telling women, no, you can't work from home, or no, you can't spend work hours homeschooling your children, we basically get on their cases and say, this is, a really good way to lose half your workforce. We also have one of our strategies is a more active strategy. We have an index fund, but we also have a more active gender strategy that focuses more on products and services that help women and focuses more on emerging markets. It's still public equities, but there we are looking for companies that do things like, for example, offering paid on-site childcare, and things that really enable women to still have all these multiple roles that they generally have without necessarily sacrificing their work lives.
Great. So there's a question that came in. The pandemic has had a major impact on so many areas of society, in particular.
That's the one I just did.
That's the one you just did.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to think about entrepreneurs, right?
Well, so actually, I think there's one, Suzanne. There's two that are related. If I can, I think are kind of companions. Okay. The notion of the danger of greenwashing. So are investors really looking at this stuff? So of course, the labels are gaining traction, the references are gaining traction. There's a lot of work that you've all pointed to, but at the end of the day, are investors really digging in, and are they assessing, and are they making honest assessment, particularly through the notion of what's affecting people on the ground in community? So are they really all the way through? And a companion question to that is, who in your view is pushing the envelope as distinguishing between B, avoiding harm, right? The A, avoiding harm, B, being beneficial, and C, really contributing to positive solutions? Who do you see as pushing the boundary on the C? So kind of two related questions, Suzanne.
So Tim, I'm going to ask you, what are the specific kinds of metrics that you track both on the climate side and on the gender side in these, for example, these portfolio companies that are in the GSearch consortium?
Yeah, and so we of course use IRIS Plus as a set of indicators to measure our impact, and there's a huge number of indicators to track Gender Lens Matters. I think we numbered more than 60. So of course we don't use 60, we use typically 3 to 5 per company. One thing I want to point out also is pay tribute to Values for Women, which is one of our technical partners. During the crisis, they helped us make assessments from a gender lens perspective of our portfolio companies. And the results was that they gave a voice to every woman in our portfolio companies to speak about their concerns within their corporate environment. They created very productive communication channels between staff and management and investors. And I think once it's invaluable, the insights you derive from that and the improvements you can make, the quick wins that you can make to improve your company. That's one thing. The other thing I wanted to mention perhaps is also 2X, which is of course a fantastic power to move the gender lens agenda. And among different things, they're working on a facility that will provide support to emerging women as fund managers and to new gender lens products, de-risking, concessionary finance, and amplifying their work in order to leverage private capital. So I think that very, very exciting prospects ahead from that perspective.
And so, Courtney, what are you seeing in terms of, because you are so data driven, that level of transparency and accountability?
Absolutely. I think specifically on the public market side, I think it's really important when you think about companies to evaluate both their end beneficiaries, right? What are the products and services that they're putting out in the market? You can often proxy for that based on where they're deriving their revenues. Is it a de minimis portion? Is it at least, double-digit percentage of their revenue that's coming from these solutions? I think that is a way to increasingly tilt towards more pure play, solution providers. But then also really looking at the corporate practices of a company. On the climate side, are they reporting in line with TCFD? Do they have policies in place to support climate aware operations? Do they have in their supply chains those same policies implemented? On the gender side, of course, as we're discussing flexible work arrangements, equal parental leave policies, a lot of these things that are really key and have been researched and studied by many experts in the field. I think those two things really have to come together. And we spend a lot of time educating our clients on what to look for and what matters in which case. And I would also echo Tim's enthusiasm around 2X. I think that's a great framework and one that's gotten a lot of market traction. I think a lot on the sustainable ESG and sustainability side, there's a proliferation of frameworks, but I think that is a great one that brings together so many dimensions around gender in particular. And I would also say the fifth pillar of 2X is around when you're looking for financial intermediaries, what is the representation of gender in the financial intermediary? And that is a conversation that has become so much more important over the last year, not just on gender, but as we think about racial justice, racial equity, diversity and inclusion, who are the asset managers and financial intermediaries through whom you're working? Who owns those companies? Who are the portfolio managers and asset managers? That is a question we're getting much more from our clients, who care broadly about ESG, but also climate and gender. And so I think that conversation is one to watch and one that we're working to help our clients solve as well.
Yeah, and we have some really good data from IFC from a study they released in 2018 research across over 700 private equity funds that showed outperformance by gender balanced teams, significant outperformance. And I think the other piece is around TCFD. Lori and I have been having this conversation around what would it take to integrate a similar strategy around gender into TCFD, right? So really looking at, governance, really looking at reporting, thinking about risk management, thinking about the internal processes. There's so much more that we can be doing around that.
Suzanne, I just wanted to add that in the chat window, as Courtney was speaking, there was a question about it's not just greenwashing concerns, it's diversity and inclusion washing or dilution concerns. And your response, Courtney, I think really highlights what people are asking about, but also, as you're just saying, you're using that to engage with your clients as well. So it's not just waiting for the investor to ask the question, it's actually the proactive engagement and use of that data and that information, which I think goes to the heart of the question.
So you mentioned 2X, just in case we can put this in the chat window, 2xchallenge.org is where you go for understanding these criteria of ownership, leadership, employment, consumption, which is the product service lens. And then again, if you're investing through a financial intermediary, what is their own picture around those different things, their ownership, leadership, potential view on employment, potential view on products and services. And then underneath all of those things, really the qualitative measures. So not only counting, but then really looking at, are we creating jobs? Are we creating quality jobs? Are we really, and really getting down into that next level of the how, and not just the numbers. I think it would be great to talk about entrepreneurs. And we haven't really talked much about entrepreneurs yet. I mean, Tim's been talking a little bit about entrepreneurs. There are so many exciting climate smart women entrepreneurs and co-founders in the picture. what are we doing right now to really make sure that they're visible and that we're really finding them and backing them and seeing them and getting capital to them? So I don't know who wants to take that one. Tim, can I come back to you?
Sure. I think, you know, we have a benefit, which is that we've gone through microfinance and we've gone through impact investing as emerging classes that now are very well established. And all of those of us who are pioneers in microfinance or impact investing remember the desert that it was when you come and start promoting your fund for the first time to people who don't really understand what you're doing. And hopefully we can derive lessons from that for this new emerging class of gender lens managers. And so I think that, you know, there's a couple of things. The first one is you have to give visibility to the first generation and enable them to access the right capital for their stage of growth. You have to de-risk their proposal for more mainstream investors so that at least for the first 2 or 3 years, there's maybe a tranche of first loss somewhere. This will really accelerate the growth of the first generation of managers. And the success of the first generation is absolutely key to scale up the whole field, right? So we have to really nurture and take care of this first generation of managers, I would say.
Yeah, I'm really excited about, we're doing this initiative at GenderSmart called Capital Connect. And we're looking across private equity, private debt, private venture capital fund managers. And so many of these gender lens funds also have a climate lens. And they've been sharing on this series of showcases just examples around the blue economy, the green economy, again, circular economy, sustainable fashion, sustainable supply chain technology. It's just, if we really want these innovations to be helping us get to the Paris targets, we got to tap into all of this innovation that's out there, and we got to find the fund managers who are one of the routes to getting us there. Lori, what else is coming up in the chat here?
There's a great question about what are we doing to harness and harvest the extraordinary power that women have as consumers, purchasing power of women, wealth of women, and the wealth transfer that's happening in many parts of the world. So, and the question is very thoughtful because it actually references all of these stats, but the core of the question is, what concrete actions are institutions taking to capitalize on these significant business opportunities and the power, the economic power that women have?
Yeah, Julie, do you want to start? Are you seeing interest from women clients into the funds that you're?
God. Yes. Yeah, if I could say that a little bit more emphatically, I would, but I'll spare you my, jumping up and down and tap dancing on the desktop. Yeah, definitely a lot more interest from women. I mean, women make the vast majority of household finance decisions. They are becoming more financially aware, and the old tropes about women in finance, they don't know anything, you should pat them on the head and assure them that you have their best interests at heart. Or the company tropes about, okay, let's make a women's line. What we're going to do is shrink it and pink it and then charge more for it. Those are things that we watch out for. It's kind of like this, that is not how you do a women's line. Especially if you're charging more for pointlessly gendered products, forget it. We're not interested. When you see genuine commitment to women as customers, women as investors, women as economic decision makers, it gets a little bit back to the greenwashing question. How can you tell, right? So if a company is out there saying, well, we're an EEO employer, great, you follow the law, fantastic. You should have a policy on cannibalism because that's against the law too. But, when you see companies that are saying, here's how we are enabling our women customers, not just making pink computers or maybe something smaller in order to suit them, or not just saying, hey, we make washing machines, it's great, it's like fantastic. So you're enabling women to do even more of the homework that isn't paid for. You really want to see companies that are thinking through women as customers and really offering them and employees and value chain partners, and having things like a supplier diversity program, having things like reporting on employment demographics, reporting on pay equity, and reporting on things like this is, here's, if we do need to customize anything for women, here's how we're doing it. And you want to see something thoughtful. So if it is, say, a maquiladora factory in Mexico where the men abscond with their wives' paychecks as soon as they leave the factory, then those companies can set up automatic, transfers to bank accounts for those paychecks. So that can't happen. That's what you want to see.
So I'm really excited by the women entrepreneurs that I'm seeing from Frontier Markets and Amped Innovation and Luwat and I mean just a better packaging, who are really sensing products and services that women want, and being very responsive and saying, okay, we got them a solar lantern, but now they have a household solar system, and now they want solar powered fans, they want solar powered cook stoves, they want productive assets that are going to help them really generate revenue. Just making those connections. When you have women in the picture, they're spotting those opportunities. Courtney, and I know we're almost out of time. Courtney, I know that you're thinking a lot about women investors in this picture, and you shared some of that, but any last words you want to give us around that?
Yeah, I would just say thinking about women as consumers of finance as well. I think that's such a huge piece in this puzzle, whether it's some of our many, many leading women financial advisors and institutional consultants who are working with, investors who may be women or maybe men, or non-identifying individuals, who care about this topic and diversity and inclusion broadly, right? I think we need to put diverse decision makers and diverse, client representatives out into the market to help our clients achieve their goals. I think there's a different level of listening. I think there's a different level of solution and creativity that comes from diverse workforces. And it's definitely about designing the products, but it's also about hearing and working with our clients. And so I think from delivering financial advice and delivering financial solutions, I think that's a key piece of this as well.
So Lori, do we have time for one last question, or?
We do.
Suzanne.
Yeah, if you want to do one last question.
I would love to. Yeah, and I think, for me, how do people find, right? When you call your financial person, right, or you call a fund manager, how do they find these opportunities to really bring climate and gender together? And what are someone asked the question, like, who's doing the most disruptive, most innovative work? Again, I'm going to come back to Courtney. I know you get to scan the whole marketplace. We'll do a lightning round. Maybe we can start with you.
Sure. I think the solution from our perspective is putting all of this data at the fingertips of our financial advisors who work with all of our clients. We have over 15,000 financial advisors. So how do we help scale these solution sets? So things like I was describing earlier, Morgan Stanley IQ, putting that data into the desktops, into the tools that advisors can use to help clients, automatically generate these types of portfolios, I think is going to be key. As Julie was alluding to, the data quality is going to improve dramatically, and that's going to help those tools in decision-making over time. But we think that's a big start, especially when we think about scale for these solutions.
Great. Julie?
So I have something, that's a fantastic resource that you have, Courtney. And by the way, the Institute for Sustainable Investing is an amazing resource. I recommend it to everyone. You can Google Gender Lens Investing. Veris Wealth Partners has a report about it. There's a lot of information. The US SIF webinar has a lot of lists of funds and fund managers that do this thing. But if you call your financial advisor and say, this is what I want to do, and they say, oh gosh, I don't know of anything, get another financial advisor. That's my number one advice.
Yeah, Jim Castleberry from Forest Bay at our summit runs $2.5 billion family office. And he said, if you don't have a financial partner who is helping you find these solutions, fire your advisor. And so thank you around that. Tim, who do you think is doing some of the most disruptive and innovative work in this area? You've already talked about your own work, but I know you have an industry-wide perspective.
Yeah, taking my, referring to the Gender Lens Initiative for Switzerland, for example, we had UBS that was one of the launch sponsors of the initiative. And it's fantastic to see that this is the biggest private wealth manager in the world, managing north of $3 trillion. And they're taking this seriously. They're really investing effort into research for women as capital owners. They've got products and services that they're designing for that purpose. And my experience is that with financial institutions, especially when we're talking about mainstream, you have to start with the leadership, right? If the leadership is not on board, it's going to be nearly impossible to affect change across the institution. So you need to educate the leadership. Once they're on board, you then need to help them create a product shelf or service offering that is adequate. And here I would refer, organizations like LuxFlag in Luxembourg that have given a label to hundreds of funds that represent billions in assets under management. When they began, it was just a microfinance label for like 30 funds. And it's fantastic to see that now they've become a reference of industry that institutional investors can use when they create their allocations. The same thing holds true for Phoenix Capital in the Netherlands. They have one of the biggest databases of impact funds in the world, and they can customize, right, the selection of funds according to your gender lens or climate considerations. So I think we need to work in tandem with these market leaders and bring the best practices home.
Thank you. And I'm going to say Gender Smart is working together in concert with 85 partners to say, what does good look like? What does it look like across these different asset classes? What does it look like across these different sectors and themes, to really look at the whole spectrum of capital, and spotlight the funds, spotlight the individual company examples, spotlight the investors who are really moving their capital this way so people can see how other people are doing it. And so just really encourage people to come and look at the resources we're posting. Lori, I'm going to come back to you. I want to thank Julie and Courtney and Tim for being in this conversation with me, because this is how we are going to really make the difference, is helping people understand what this looks like, and the why now, and just so appreciative of you being part of this. Thanks. Back to you.
Absolutely. And thank you all so much. And listening to the conversation, the why was so clear as your motivational force, but what you all did an amazing job doing, and the chat was also reinforcing this, was giving us specific examples of the how. So it's not, people are seeing the why, but now there are pathways to action. And the levers that you touched upon were so many, but with very concrete references. Of course, there's the talent lever, both at the enterprise level, at the manager level, the talent, which is incredibly important and increasingly diverse talent. There's allocation as a lever. There's risk as a lever. There's strategy as a lever, both that intentional, Suzanne, as you led with, and integrated. There's the visibility. Several of you talked about, and you did it in your examples, showcasing what is working and what's happening. That is a lever for action because others want to follow when they can see it happening. The lever of data, incredibly powerful, and the lever of reporting. And sometimes that is an activation, a requirement to report if it's done authentically, and then importantly, if it's used, if the information is used. But I love where Tim, you concluded, and you all talked about it, the lever of decision-making, and the lever of leadership. And all of you are leaders in the field. And it really is my privilege to thank you all on behalf of the Institute for your continued leadership, for your conversion of inspirational concepts into concrete actions. And I look forward to engaging further with the Institute community around climate and gender, the power of now, the imperative of now. So thank
Lori,
you.
you're such an amazing champion for this work. Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you all for
Pleasure to be
joining
here.
us today. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks all.